This was one of my favorite removals of the year. I got a call for a bunch of bees living in a big box at a power plant in Austin. So I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know how big of a box we were talking about, but I got there and it sure was a big box. It was the size of this picnic table at least. And there was a lot of bee traffic coming in and out of a little knot hole right on the front of the box. So I was really excited. And I didn't know how heavy it was going to be. I didn't know how big the hive was going to be inside. So I came up with a plan, just using what materials I could find on site. And I gave the bees a bunch of smoke. And it was time to get into the hive and see the colony and meet the bees, which for me is always one of the most exciting parts of every removal, especially one like this where I don't know the size of the hive. I don't know how many bees are going to be in there, and I have no idea what the hive is going to look like. So I gave the bees a bunch of smoke, and then I slowly lifted the lid off of the big box, and I saw the most beautiful beehive. It was bright and yellow and full of fresh comb that the bees had just built. It looked like they hadn't been there for long, but there were a ton of bees. There were easily 50,000 bees in this colony, and I could tell this comb was going to be a little hard to work with because it was so bright, it was so yellow. That lets me know that it's new comb that the bees just built, and that new comb tends to be very soft and very malleable. And it was also really hot out this day, so it was easily 100 degrees, which makes it even more difficult to deal with this wax comb. There were a lot of bees, there was a lot of comb to remove, so I set up my equipment. I got some sawhorses out of my truck and put the hive at about waist level so I didn't have to move too far from the lid of the box to the new hive. And I definitely misjudged how heavy the comb would be, how big it was going to be, and how soft it was going to be, because when I picked up the first piece of comb off the lid, it instantly collapsed and fell right onto the ground. So I picked up the comb and I started to put it into frames of the new hive. I used rubber bands and I cut it out to fit perfectly into the frames of the new hive and secured it with the rubber bands, and then put the piece of comb into the new hive so that the bees would have all of their hard work and had everything they were collecting throughout the season and all the wax comb they had been building. So after I got the first piece of comb into the new hive, I just repeated the process over and over again. I removed each piece of comb off the lid, and I cut the comb and put it into the new frames of the new hive. And this was a really big hive, so I had to work slowly and carefully while handling the comb because I didn't want to destroy any of the bees' hard work. This was also a very healthy colony with everything the bees needed to survive. The colony had plenty of nectar and pollen and baby bees, and I knew that there was a healthy queen hiding somewhere in the hive. I just had to find her. There was also a good amount of honey in this hive, which I couldn't resist, so I tried a bite. And no two bites of honey I take from a beehive like this are ever exactly the same. The taste of the honey is dependent on the flowers that the bees are foraging from, and the flowers that are in bloom, of course, changes day to day. The temperament of the colony can also change from day to day, but lucky for me, this colony was extremely gentle, especially for how large they were. I always sort of get into a zone or a state of flow when doing a long removal like this. The process is repetitive and you have to pay extreme attention to every detail and every step in every move you make. Being in a beehive forces you to be fully present in the moment, and for me it brings a certain calmness and stillness that I really enjoy. And despite the temperature outside being well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, removing these bees was actually a breeze. The hive was at the perfect height where I could see all of it and work right alongside the bees as they were working. And they weren't bothered by my presence at all. They just kept doing their normal bee tasks that they needed to do for this colony to survive. And by the time I had most of the comb in the beehive and I had saved all of the bees' honey in a feeder for them to have in their new home, I was almost a little sad that I was nearing the end of this bee removal. It was such a beautiful hive, and I could have just sat there and watched these bees work all day. I loved watching them work. I loved seeing the colors of pollen that they were bringing into the hive. But I knew that they were in a place where they were no longer wanted, and the best thing that I could do for them was to remove their hive. So as I removed the final pieces of comb, I felt really thankful that I was called to relocate such a beautiful hive, and that I got to see it and work alongside these bees. But I was also feeling a little sad that there was no more hive for me to remove. After I had removed all of the comb from the lid and put it into the new hive, I still had a ton of bees that I had to get into the new hive. So I did my favorite thing to do in beekeeping, which is scooping the bees up with my hands. So they were hanging off the lid, and I just kept scooping handful of bees, putting them into the new hive, looking for the queen, but I didn't see her. So after I had removed a lot of the bees from the lid, I noticed that there were a lot of bees inside the box and still flying into the box, still using the box. So I thought, well, maybe the queen is in there. So I lifted the lid off of the box and saw there were a ton of bees on the underside of the lid. They were actually in a formation that kind of looked like the United States of America. It was really interesting. But I took the lid and I put it down by the new hive at a level that I could work with the bees. Now, this was a pretty big colony, so I knew that it was going to take me a bit of time to find the queen, but every now and again I get lucky, and as I'm working, I see her right there on a piece of comb. But that didn't happen with this removal. There were so many bees on the lid of the box, I thought maybe there's a chance the queen is on the lid. And that's when all of a sudden I saw the queen. She was right there in the crowd of bees. She looked like a happy, healthy queen. She was fully intact, and the other bees were circling around her, and she looked like a healthy and beautiful queen. So I put her in the queen clip, and the clip is designed so that other bees can go in and out of the clip to care for the queen, but she's the largest bee in the colony, so she stays in there and she stays safe and secure. And once I had the queen, I put her into the new hive, and all of the other bees started to follow her into the new hive. But this colony had so many bees that I had to give them a bunch of smoke, and I spent a lot of time just herding bees off of the lid into the new hive. And I also spent a lot of time just waiting for these bees, waiting for them to move into the new hive. After most of the colony moved into the new hive, I noticed that they were already running out of room, so I gave the new hive another box, and I gave the bees a bit more space. And there were bees that were hanging off the underside of the new hive, so I did my favorite thing and I scooped them up and put them inside the new hive. But I waited for a while for them to get settled and for the bees to stop swarming around. And eventually they all settled into the new hive with their queen. And at the end of the day, I got the nicest colony of bees with a really strong queen who they've been some of the best bees in my apiary ever since. They are prolific honey producers. They have a great temperament. It was such a joy to do this removal, and it was really one of my favorite removals in a long time. I loved that I just got to remove a giant colony of bees out of a really big box. So I hope y'all enjoyed this as much as I did, and thank you so much for watching.